for being here today as we introduce Contact Unwinding. So what is Contact Unwinding? So first of all, my name is Michelle E. Clay, and I am one of the certification faculty members at Eastwest Somatics Institute, founded by Sandra Fraley, and a certification teacher of Shin Somatics methods. And one of the movement processes, we have three core movement processes: the land to water yoga, dance processes, and our body work. And I have been a dancer my whole life. I met Sandra 30 some odd years ago as a grad student, and I am also a professor in a Department of Dance and Movement Studies in a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. And I have been really drawn to this work from the beginning. First, it started with the body work and just the myriad ways in which our practices, our spiral model, and the narratives have really been such an incredible support for my curiosity and innovation in my teaching, the way I approach administrative tasks. It's just been a really rich way to approach my life and work. So today's experience is just a small nugget of that. But I use contact unwinding. The subject today is contact unwinding as somatic therapy. I use contact unwinding in educational context as well as therapeutic. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit. But contact unwinding has morphed a lot. It started as a practice we do in the studio with a partner using touch. And we learned during the pandemic that we could approximate the experience of contact unwinding through verbal cueing, because touch and verbal cueing both are effective at focusing attention. And so contact unwinding is an intuitive improvisational practice where there's a primary mover and a guide. It is influenced by contact improvisation and Sandra's life in dance and modern dance. Contact improvisation is a modern dance practice where there are two partners who are sharing weight, they're in contact with each other, maybe even fully supporting someone's weight, and you're constantly navigating and problem solving, but you're both in it and moving equally. And contact unwinding is an asymmetrical relationship. So there's a primary mover and a guide who observes movement that's occurring from the primary mover and then can match that movement with touch or introduce a new possibility with movement or touch or verbal cueing. We also realize that we have new possibilities with verbal cueing, because instead of just focusing on a location on the body to focus our attention toward, we can introduce dream imagery, we can work with chakras, we can use touch with people that may not feel comfortable with touch. We can use verbal cueing instead. And so more abstract ideas and images can enter in. So in person, you can use verbal cueing and touch. So for today, because we're doing this without a partner in our space, we'll be using verbal cueing. Sometimes it will feel quite literal, like your right elbow. So what does it mean when I say your right elbow? That might mean as soon as I say that, your attention will go to the right elbow, but you can decide whether you want to match moving toward where that touch or maybe a landing spot might be, or move away from it. You can also ignore it altogether, right? So you can, if I say, and you're in the flow and I say right elbow, and you're exploring something with your wrist, and you're really investigating something about the wrist that you're curious about, you don't have to obey an instruction and, suddenly move your elbow. And this is something I have to tell my dancers. It can be a real challenge to not feel like you have to just suddenly shift gears and obey this instruction. I can let that invitation drift away and just keep exploring what I'm exploring. So in this way, the primary mover has the agency to decide how to respond, whether it's touch or verbal cueing, which is very different than a contact improvisation where you might have, your partner might be throwing all their weight on you and you suddenly have to adapt and adjust to that. So there's a lot of listening and observing that happens in contact unwinding. And I think this is why there's such potential for therapeutic contexts, because not only do we have the opportunity to introduce a movement pattern or awaken a part of a body that may not be readily expressive, we can also honor what's already happening, right? And so there's some affirmation there for the primary mover that the partner isn't there to fix me or to change what I'm doing, but there can be an invitation to move beyond what I've chosen, but I also always have agency to decide how I want to respond. So one of the images we use with our touch is that the contact, if I was in a studio practicing with someone, the nature of that touch is so light. It's like a flower petal landing or a leaf landing. So it's just enough that there's a sensation, but it's not heavy-handed. It doesn't stay long. It doesn't direct. It's just an awakening, a little possibility. And it's usually with the flat of the hand, so it doesn't feel pokey, or we don't use brushing or anything like that because that can get kind of ticklish. So it's just a light like, hey, what about here? What about here? Or what about opening my heart space? So it can be places I wouldn't necessarily touch someone's heart space, right? But I can invite an opening in the heart space just by using language. So all the suggestions are intended to be light suggestions, light in weight and gentle and supportive. So for today, because we're in a virtual format, and another way that this is therapeutic, I'm jumping a little bit, is that this isn't just for dancers, right? This is for everyone. Everyone's a mover, everyone's a dancer anyway. But you can be, if you can move, you can do this work, right? So you can be in a chair, you can be standing, you can be sitting, lying down, you can be in any orientation, you can be outside, making contact with the environment. So we can get into some somatic explorations where we can be in contact with the trees or feel the wind and dance in response to sounds and sensations around us in that way as cues, and have a witness watch that experience or witness ourselves, right? And I have done this in a teaching context with music. So in my jazz classes, I play jazz music, and I have partners use touch and verbal cueing to awaken movement of the spine, as a way of exploring call and response with a partner, so that they are practicing values of jazz, right? So this template can be used in a lot of ways. The video I created for Ismeta's Global Somatic Movement Day, I use imagery from the chakras. It's very loosely based on the chakras, but the structure is a scaffolding of chakra unwinding. So that's just a bit of those possibilities, and maybe you'll find through today, through some experience, maybe some ways that this might inform your work, or sometimes just the invitation to move with ease and pleasure is all we need. So with that, I'm curious to know, what are you curious about today? Just with that overview, what is tugging your curiosity today?
So I wasn't sure whether I should bring somebody else to this session. And I didn't, if in fact, possibly if I'd had somebody who I could have brought along, I would have, but there wasn't that possibility. So, and it's nice that you sort of explain that there are other, the unwinding versus the contact improvisation, because I think in my head I had more of an idea that it was more around contact improvisation.
Yeah.
Which is something I'm not, in fact, it's only really recently that I felt even vaguely comfortable doing anything like that.
Thank you for that. I have found when I teach this template to students who are new to touch, or students who have had previous experiences but don't feel competent with contact improvisation, that contact unwinding is just a really easy way to begin the process, or to learn about the power of touch without feeling so responsible or inadequate, I guess, is sometimes the feeling that if contact improvisation is amazing, if you have a great partner and as you build skill, and contact unwinding doesn't require that same level of experience. So it's something that's, I find, readily accessible for students, and it's a comfortable way to introduce touch back into relating with others, especially after the pandemic. It feels less invasive, and yeah, it can be a nice way in. But it is a different experience when you have touch. And so I encourage you, if you do have an opportunity to play with these ideas with a partner, yeah, it's a different experience. And if you do join the conference next week, we're going to do breakout rooms where you can at least have an exchange of being in both roles, and see what that might be like then when you're in a room with somebody. So yeah, so thank you for that. And I think Alexandra and Sarah are more familiar with, but is there something you want to add to what I've already said before we have a short experience with this?
I think I'm really curious about doing contact unwinding in my body at this moment with what I'm experiencing and sensing in my body. I'm really curious about really digging into the process, just to be curious, because there's one, and to really like use this time as a lab for myself, to really not worry about teaching, or I just want to receive. And I really want to take this process into where my body is at the moment, and without having a partner. I don't think I've done that, just really just taken the class and just don't worry about how everybody else is doing. So that's what I'm curious about. How's Michelle going to do this? And I'm so excited. I feel grateful. So glad you reminded me.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being here. How about you, Alexandra?
I was just going to add about one of my favorite parts of this is what an easy way these new pathways can be formed. And really, when you think about the thought and like from the brain perspective of like the reticular activating system, right? That's where the focus and attention kind of integrates. And I think about that in the world in terms of like archetypes. So if there's something that's really been calling my attention, this is a great way to invite the embodied piece of those things, really tapping into like the frequency or the energy of it. When you were speaking about the ecosomatic piece, like I love to do this work outdoors, and I actually am usually outdoors, and today I'm inside. So I'm really curious to see how that changes my experience. So I kind of purposely took myself out of my natural environment that I usually do this work to kind of invite in something new.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll add, if you're in a space that feels a little small, just be aware of what's around you. I like to do this work with my eyes closed. And if I have two partners in a room working together, I invite the primary mover to move with the eyes closed so they can really tap into inner sensing. And then the guide can make sure they're not getting too close to a wall or whatever. And the other thing about this work that I think is really, really unique is that you don't have to do this practice for very long. You can do this in a few minutes, 4 to 5 minutes at most, with very few prompts, either through touch or verbal cueing, so that there's really time to dig into various explorations and curiosities without feeling like you're constantly interrupted and there's too much information and too much going on. And that's where the somatic therapy piece, I think that's why it can be so valuable as a therapeutic process, because it doesn't take a lot. Sometimes it could be too much, right? And why you wouldn't want to have 2 or 3 partners doing this at once. It's just too much information and stimulation in the body. But you can gain a lot in just a few minutes of dropping inward. And even for someone, if your eyes are closed, you don't know where that stimulus, that touch might be. So there's a playfulness and a curiosity and a vulnerability maybe that comes with not knowing, but this ability to be internally sensing, and then there's a relationship with someone else who might be the guide, or in your spaces, it could be you might be moving and all of a sudden I feel the wall or this sweater on the chair, and that's an interesting texture, and just exploring the surfaces around you. So to that end, if you are playing with your eyes closed, so that like with a partner, you don't want to see where that's coming from unless you need to see until you get comfortable. But if you're in a smaller space moving, just keep the movement easy, keep yourself safe. And the exploring, we want it to feel sensory based and in your body, even if you're relating to things around you. So can you see with your mind's eye what that sweater looks like as you feel it, for example? So thank you. With that, can you decide how you want to begin? Do you want to begin sitting, standing? Do you want to move to somewhere? Just as long as I can see you, if you're comfortable with that. So because I want to use prompts based on what I'm seeing you do. I don't have anything pre-scripted here. I want to just offer prompts based on what I'm seeing, as would be the case if we were in a space together. So I'll remind you, this is not a performance. You're not being recorded. So you don't have to impress anybody. This is just for you. And a reminder to move with ease and pleasure. If something doesn't feel good, decide why you're doing it and know that it's okay to let go of that. If you're curious about exploring that, that's fine too. You are the boss of your experience. So with that, take a moment to just settle in and take your awareness inward. Maybe noticing what surfaces you're in contact with already. And maybe just noticing your breath. We can focus your thoughts on just being here right now. And see if an image comes to you, or an invitation to move. Even in small ways you're moving already. if you feel the invitation to explore a movement, follow that intuition, be curious about it, be easy with it. Drifting. Curious hands exploring. Cradling. Expansion. Roots supporting and spreading. Easy spirals. Jiggling. Gooey caramel. Shoulder blades dancing. singing. Your right leg. Your pelvic bowl. Your hand loves your shoulder. The top of your head. When you're ready, find a natural ending to this dance you're in. Be easy. Take your attention to your breath and take a moment to allow your nervous system to digest your experience. Without interpretation or judgment, reflect on your experience while you were moving. What did you notice? What were you curious about? Did any patterns emerge? Is there something that you want to remember from this session? When we work in partners, there's an opportunity to talk to your partner about your experience. You can also do some journaling, writing down, or you can use some art processes, paint a picture, write a poem. It's another way to digest and reflect on your experiences. What's resonating with you right now? Is there something you want to remember? So I'll just give you a moment with those questions. And did your image change? The image that you started with? Did you learn something from that experience? When you were working with a partner, you then could change roles. So you'd have your partner would be the primary mover and you would be the guide, offering verbal cues or touch cues. And then you could both share your experiences in each role because different things come up in each role. And we have a few minutes left. I'm wondering if anyone feels comfortable sharing anything from your experience or questions about contact unwinding or the possibilities for contact unwinding as somatic therapy that we haven't talked about yet.
I'm curious, Michelle, about when you're watching and your rhythm, and I know you're improvising. What are you noticing, and what, I guess, how do you, is it an intuitive deciding, or is it something like at one point you said jiggling? Was there something that prompted that? I guess I'm asking for your secrets.
Sure. What is my stream of consciousness?
Yeah.
So I've never done it with 3 partners at once. So that was really interesting for me because what I saw happening was the use of hands with exploring. So I affirmed what I saw, and then what I noticed from that was that that deepened the exploration and a curiosity. It shifted the way it was happening. So even though I was affirming it, it still drew attention to it and it created change, invited something new that wasn't already happening. So in a very small way, even though I was matching what I was seeing, it still invited something new. The word jiggling came up because all of you were in this beautiful, meditative, thoughtful flow. And I thought, let's put some playfulness in here. Let's shift the rhythm. Let's do some jiggling and see what happens. And the invitation is always there to completely ignore it. So some of you are like, oh no, I'm just staying with what I'm doing. And then some jiggling happened too, right? So you weren't all on the same page, but that's fine. That was cool, right? To see. So I was really just what I was seeing from the 3 of you. And then in some cases where I didn't see movement happening, like the pelvic bowl, I didn't see a lot of movement in the pelvis. So I said right leg, which if I think right leg, tends to be that we start to play with one leg, which is going to require a weight shift. So we're activating movement in the pelvis anyway, but then I was like, let's get the pelvis moving, right? So I was curious to see if that movement, that invitation would travel upward from the right leg, moving, dancing. Even if we were standing on the left, there was a shift, an asymmetry to movement, right? But then also a grounding. And when you say pelvis, that also can invite some shifting of weight and grounding through the root chakra, right, and into the earth. And so, yeah. And then I wanted to keep the asymmetry going. So we talked about the right leg, but then I said your left, right, or the shoulder, and tried to create some asymmetry in the languaging, because why not, right? So I'm using cues based on my curiosity as well. What if I offer this cue? What will happen? I don't know. I'm not dictating. I'm just inviting, and so it is a really intuitive process. I'm not predicting the outcome. I don't know what's going to happen there, but change happens because we're focusing attention in a way that might not be what you're thinking about or how you're moving. And so even without touch, there can be those shifts can still happen, right? And I'm really seeing all of you, so I'm really honoring what's happening. I'm not inserting my agenda on any of you. I'm curious to know if you feel comfortable sharing experiences. Like, were you able to drop in quickly? Did your image change? What was the shifting in thought process or explorations, or why do this? That's the big question. Why do this?
I'm happy to share a bit.
Thank you.
I started off with quite a visual experience going on, and it was something that was maybe in my mind, and then I thought, well, rather than trying and get rid of it, let's work with it, so sort of working with that. And then I stayed in this sort of visual sense for quite a while. And when you just reminded me, because you were talking of it, when you mentioned feeling, and then I started touching what I was visualizing. And then it shifted completely, and I went into a completely different space after that, which was great, in fact, because it was, but it was a, and then I sort of when I thought about it, I realized that I'd actually gone into, a very different experience that was much more about the tactile, the internal tactile, all of that kind of thing, but also more real, like material, rather than some sort of visual thing. So that was really nice. That was interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's a reminder that I don't know about you, but sometimes my thoughts keep going, like the monkey brain. And so just to take a pause and have some invitation to just get out of that loop, right? So yeah, thank you for that.
I can share a little bit about my experience. So it was really interesting to me how my hands were immediately drawn kind of to the solar plexus area. And immediately when I made contact with that space, I had this vision of like a waterfall, and it was just like this free flow. And so it was like almost like my perspective was kind of towards the bottom of the waterfall, like when you're watching it actually hit where the river or whatever it flows into. And then I noticed I started to like climb upward, and it was like, let me get a new vantage point. So I could feel myself like moving upward, and then feeling almost like, okay, now I'm at the top and now I'm looking down. And it was like right when I was like doing that, you had said expand. And so then my image like switched to a bird of like, okay, now I can expand and I can soar. And so it was really beautiful because I felt like it was such an integration of the personal development work I've been doing on in just increasing like my own belief in the work that I'm doing, and like the personal power that I embody to then bring into other spaces. And I actually facilitated something yesterday and I received such beautiful feedback. And I felt like this experience was really an integration of the feedback I received in an embodied way. Whereas, like, otherwise, we may receive feedback and we kind of don't actually bring it into the body, where that's like what then orchestrates the next experience. So it was just a really beautiful way to receive and to have a space for integration.
Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's so much potential to bring this simple idea into a variety of contexts. And yeah, a change in thought patterns as well as movement patterns. Such potential. So I invite you to watch this video again, because these prompts on a different day might create a completely different experience. And I do have that recording on Ismeta's site and on the YouTube channel that Sandra has, where there's another experience, short, 5 minutes, different prompts, right? And so there's ways to play with and experience this on your own, and certainly opportunities to play when you have the opportunity to work with others. I know people have done this with their pets, right? So, or children. It's a wonderful thing to do with children. Play with images and watch how the movement unfolds. So for people who believe they have limited movement or do have limited movement, just what movement is possible and can feel good is also a really lovely gift.